The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Courtney Pollock, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Power BI 101 for Sage 100, presented by our Sage 100 Project Manager, Bruce Kern. A little housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise to a minimum. However, throughout the webinar, you can submit any questions you have. If you'd like to submit a question, look for the questions section in your GoToWebinar, and we will answer all your questions at the end of the presentation. We're also recording this presentation, and it will be distributed tomorrow to all attendees, as well as those who registered but were unable to attend. And finally, we would appreciate your participation in our polling questions throughout the presentation and our survey question at the end. With that said, we appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to attend this webinar. We're here to help you get the most out of your software solutions and help you find an easier way to run your business by providing your tools, support, software, and industry knowledge whenever you need it. So whether you're here researching a new solution or you're just here to learn, we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions you have. And lastly, as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels. We encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to Bruce.
Thank you, Courtney. Welcome, everybody, to our presentation on Power BI with Sage 100. A little bit about our agenda today. You're now in the introduction. We're going to talk about what is Power BI, why Sage 100 Premium is ideal for use with it, some of the different components and moving parts that are involved, and last but not least, we'll try to actually exercise all of the moving parts, refreshing some live data all the way from a Sage 100 instance, all the way into the cloud where an end user would potentially consume this data. So our first poll question, are you currently using any business intelligence software? So while you're thinking about that question, let's define what is business intelligence software, first of all. So, BI is this acronym that's really, being used a lot more and more. It's kind of a trend in the market today. So business intelligence really could be any kind of application that you're using that helps slice, dice, filter, extract needed information in a way that's usable for you. So there are lots of different BI applications out there. Microsoft Power BI is what we're going to kind of touch upon today in terms of using it with Sage, but there are many other applications, Tableau, DataSelf, Sage Data and Analytics. There's all kinds of stuff out there. So this is just one of many pieces in the landscape.
And thank you to everyone that's responding. We're going to leave the poll open for a few more seconds as those last answers come in. Okay, Bruce, it's interesting. It looks like we have a wide variety of answers here. So we're going to close the poll out in a couple seconds. And so here are the results. So it looks like we have a wide spread in our audience. We have some people using Power BI, about 40%. About 20% are using another program besides Microsoft Power BI. And then there's also some people evaluating different programs. And then about 30% of our audience is interested in learning more about Power BI today. So that's great.
Wow, quite a cross section there. We've got a little of everything. Well, we'll move on. So here we'll talk a little bit just about the big picture, with Power BI. So kind of on the left side of the screen, they show these different icons. It's not a coincidence that most of them are Microsoft related because Power BI is a Microsoft tool. So you'll see the Excel and the Access there. But really anything, you can connect to an awful lot of things over there. And that also includes ODBC, which is what Sage 100 Advanced and Standard use. And notice the icon there for SQL. We call that Sql or Sql Server. That is the backend for Sage 100 Premium. That's what we're going to be featuring today. So the idea is that you have one or more places where there's data that you need. You'll connect to that data in Power BI. And that's the desktop icon. There's a desktop piece. We'll see that here shortly. And then we'll work with that data after we've connected to it to make a data model. massage the data, filter things that we do or don't want to see, change the data in some ways that makes it more usable. And then we'll create some interesting visuals with it. And then we'll finally publish those visuals out to the internet. So here we have our raw data. The Power BI desktop is kind of represented in this next slide, where we have the Power BI desktop. We then publish the information to the service, and then Microsoft is very proud of their Power BI mobile apps. We're not going to be featuring mobile phone access. Most of our Sage 100 type users are going to be using a PC with a full screen or even two. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Okay, so the idea here is you make your connections in the desktop, you build a data model, you create content, you publish the content to the internet and share it with end users. So you don't necessarily have to follow that specific flow. There can be some exceptions, and the Power BI is a product that's constantly under evolution. So, you know, what we see today might be a little bit different tomorrow. I think they're moving away from the desktop a little bit and maybe seem to be gravitating more and more to strictly just the Power BI service. But as of today, these are the pieces that we're going to be looking at. Now, why Power BI? Again, there's a lot of BI applications out there. You know, Power BI is a Microsoft application. Many companies already use the Microsoft Suite or the Office 365, which typically comes with a Power BI in most cases. So because you already own it, you know, usually the cost is very low. You can either start using it now. In today's webinar, I actually updated my license to a premium per user. We'll see in a future slide why I did that, and that was only $240. So, you know, if you have low intensity BI needs, you might just be able to get away with a fairly low cost of entry. So that's a reason why we're looking at it. Lots of online resources available. Every single thing that you're going to see in today's webinar, I learned online. By myself, not had a single class. And granted, my Microsoft Power BI knowledge is thin or shallow. We're not going to take deep dives on stuff. It's about the moving parts. But I think you'll see, because it's a Microsoft product, tons of online resources, lots of great training videos, and lots of people out there that specialize in this application as well. So again, and you can use it with many, many data sources. We'll take a look at that as we go through. And you can also use this with either version, Sage 100 Standard, Advanced, or Premium. So good low-cost piece that you might already own some of. Now, if you do get into some real heavy BI needs and you hit a wall, either you need sort of a data warehouse application, you need more on the front end to help build connections in a more robust or combined fashion. You know, you may find yourself hitting the wall with Power BI, and you may need a more robust application. Typically, that's going to cost you a little more, but you get what you pay for. So I want to remind everyone, we do have a really outstanding product in the market that SWK features named DataSelf. We're going to be having a webinar on that in April. So if you like today's webinar, make sure that you get to that webinar and check that out. That is going to take up what we're showing you today, you know, many, many levels in terms of what you can do. So this is the intro. The DataSelf would be the cream de la crop. All right, so here, this slide here, we're just showing this today because we're going to be featuring Sage 100 Premium, which has a SQL Server back end. So most of the time when you have the Office 365 suite that comes with the Pro, you're going to usually see that it's a Pro license. So the Pro license is great, but here we're featuring some differences. We're going to want to use the direct query today, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. The premium per user license in Power BI is the one that will support that direct query. We're going to build a data model today, so you can see that there's quite a bit of difference in the size of that model when we use the premium per user. Maximum storage, again, a lot bigger. A big one here for a lot of people is how often can I refresh the data? The premium allows you to do that 48 times a day. I think that's about every 15 minutes. So that's pretty regular, pretty current, you know, very recent refresh. And then you have your paginated reports. Okay, so here, another slide kind of just talking about the licenses. I promise this will be the last slide that talks about licenses. Really here on this slide, the only thing I really wanted to point out is with the premium per user or the PPU Power BI license down here in the lower right corner, we can see we contribute to content to users who have free and pro licenses. So the reason that's important is if you do want to use your Power BI and you do have the pro licenses for your end users, somebody might have to be elevated to the premium so that they can actually, create all the content and distribute that to your pro end users. It's a way that Microsoft has structured that. Okay, so just a little note on that. Now we're going to talk just a minute here about connecting to the data. So we'll get in here. And hold on, we'll minimize that. And we'll start talking about why we would do one or the other. So the first thing we're going to do today is just talk about what is SQL. So a lot of people have Sage 100 Standard and Advanced. They might have heard of Sage 100 Premium. They might have heard of SQL Server, but they don't really know what that refers to. So what you're looking at here is an actual SQL Server. It's a database application by Microsoft also. And the big difference is here, we won't spend too much time on this, is just that your Sage data, as opposed to it being in a Windows structure under the MAS 90 folder, for those of you who like to look in the back end, the data is all in a SQL Server. So this just means that this is the database application where we access everything. And you can see we've got some MAS _ 3-character company codes here. And the term direct query that we'll be seeing today with the premium, that term query, it confused me at first when I was first dealing with SQL. It really just means how you do anything with SQL, data in SQL, whether that's looking at the data. Certainly a query sounds like looking at data, but it's also how you can change data, append data, delete data, sort data. So a query is just the way you do anything pretty much in SQL. So this is what you're looking at. I'll open up one table here just so you can get a flavor for what it looks like. As opposed to what you're normally used to seeing. So we'll just come down here to something really simple. And we will select that table and select some records. And that actually is the act of performing a query. So here it's looking for the records. Up here is the actual query for it. It's demo data, so in this case there may not have been any records in there, but that's the sum extent of all the SQL we're going to try to cover with you. But if you're wondering what does this term query mean, what is SQL? Well, SQL is the application. Query just means anything you would do in it to actually do something directly in the data. So the next thing we're going to do here is introduce you to the Power BI desktop. This is the starting point for Power BI. So the Power BI desktop is really just another Microsoft application like Excel, like Word that you might use on your PC. And it's trying to open. We'll give it a second to pop open here. These webinars do use a few resources on the machine and it does tend to make things run a little slower on these VMs. Oh, they made me change my password this morning, so let's hope we don't get a hiccup here. Okay, so here we are. So this is kind of just like opening a blank Excel file. So they'll give you immediately lots of places to take tutorials and do things like that. We're not going to worry about that too much. So the first thing we need to do when we're going to start doing anything with any kind of BI application is we need to connect to data. So there's a number of ways you can do this. There's the Get Data button up here, which has its own menu. You can see we've got some big buttons across the main of the page. These are the big hitters that Power BI likes to work with. And we'll certainly do that. I'm going to just click into here for a minute. And show some of the other data sources and talk about the difference between Sage 100 Premium and Sage 100 Standard or Advanced. So here we're seeing all the different data sources that Power BI can connect to. And you can see there's a lot of things in here. So one of the things that you can connect to is the ODBC. So all kinds of things in here. So here's your ODBC. Now Sql doesn't use ODBC, but Sage 100 Standard and Advanced does. So we're going to see here very shortly how easy it is to connect to Sql, and Power BI really likes to connect to Sql. If you want to connect your Sage 100 Standard or Advanced, you will need to do the following things. You will need to set up a system data source on your system where your Sage is. And then you probably also going to want to install the 64-bit ODBC driver. Those are kind of the prerequisites. And then you'll be able to see that ODBC data source in your Power BI by going through this ODBC option. So if you need any help doing those steps, let us know. We can help you with that. Now, one of the problems that we're going to see is we're going to go ahead and connect to the SQL Server now. So with the premium per user license, we can do what's called a direct query to SQL. So the very first thing we're going to do here when we connect is we're going to have to make a choice whether we are going to be importing data, which if you use Sage 100 Standard or Advanced is your only option. Import is synonymous with caching data, meaning it's actually going to bring the data into the Power BI and cache it there, and then you'll be working off that cached data. Direct query means we're going to actually tap directly into the SQL database. We're not going to cache data, which makes it faster for refreshes and doing various other things. So that's what we're going to feature today. Now, if you do have Sage 100 Standard and Advanced, certainly there can be some workarounds. If you have a SQL Server, you could set up a link, what's called a link server, to get your data into SQL. There could be some other types of things you could do to get your data into SQL, but that infrastructure alone requires some maintenance. It requires data sources, so more moving parts. By using Sage 100 Premium with the direct query, we're kind of bypassing all of that other stuff. So that is part of why Sage 100 Premium with the SQL backend is preferable for connecting to BI applications like this. So here we go. We're going to give it a name. We need to know the name of this case, the SQL Server. And that name is SQL SWK World. We're going to choose the direct query option here, and we're just going to hit the OK button. We don't need to specify a database or anything. And it's talking, it sees the SWK world. There's all of our company databases that we saw in the SQL Server. And we're going to be playing around with this MO1 today. So we're going to expand the MO1, and we're going to go out here and find some tables. Okay, so bear with me while I locate these tables. Okay, we're going to choose the AR customer, and we're going to pick two other tables. For those of you who write Crystal reports, you'll immediately recognize these tables as being some of the biggest tables that you use when you do report writing. The AR invoice history header and the AR invoice history detail. Okay, so we've got three tables selected now, and we're just going to go ahead and click this load button. Now, if you're doing an import type connection, this is where it would actually try to pull in and cache this data. Remember that slide about the limitations on how much you can cache if you're using the Pro license versus the Premium. So it's out there, it's giving us the checkbox, it's telling us those are all good. And there we go. Now, if we did have Sage 100 Standard or Advanced, which we don't, but if we did, there'd be another little button over here on the left that we can't see. That would be a place where we could click on that button and we would actually see the cache data in Power BI. Because we're doing a direct query to the SQL Server, we are not caching the data, so we do not have that icon in this particular instance. Just mentioning that in case you're one of those standard or advanced users. Now, Power BI immediately wants to take us to this little graphical chart icon here. That's what we're on. It's hard to see, but there's a little yellow bar on the left indicating that's where we're at. This is where it wants us to actually start building visuals. We're not quite ready to do that. So we've established our connection. The next thing we need to do is create a relationship between the tables that we've connected. So we're going to come over here and click on this little icon. This shows the 3 tables that we brought in. And what we need to do is create relationships between these. So creating relationships here it's similar, it's analogous to, very similar in many ways to linking in Crystal reports for anybody who's done any of that, and I'm sure we have some of those. So bear with me while we create some relationships. We'll click New here, and we'll pick the customer table, and we'll go ahead and pick that AR invoice history header table. And Power BI has its own logic and logarithms built into it. It will attempt to locate what it thinks is the correct relationship. You can manipulate with these. You can change these if you want. Usually what I have found is that what it does is works pretty well. And you can study up on all these topics, of course. They're readily available online. I'm just going to go with the defaults for now and hit OK. And so now we've got a relationship there. And now we need to create one more relationship to get the other table involved. And we'll do the header to the detail, and we'll let it highlight what it thinks is the correct field. In this case, invoice number. We'll just go with that default for now. And then we have our 2 relationships established there. And then we'll let the Power BI do its thing. You can see it put some lines in. So depending on how you want to look at your model here and how you want to see the relationships, you can move these things around like so. So if that makes more sense to you visually, you can do that. We won't spend too much more time on this part, but you can see here's the tables with all their fields. We hover over information here. We can see what we're connecting to, what database, what SQL Server. Is it a direct query or is it an indirect query? Okay, now we're getting somewhere. So now we've connected and we have a relationship between the tables. Probably what I'd recommend at this point is that we save our data. So I'm going to do a file save as here. And this is really just like saving an Excel file that you would save on your desktop or wherever you like to save your Excel files, except for this is instead of an Excel file, it's a Power BI file ending in PBIX. So XLSX for Excel, PBIX for Power BI. We'll just throw this on the desktop. And we'll just give it a name, whatever you want to call it. Okay, gives us the name at the top. We're set to go. Now what we're going to do is talk about transforming the data or building a model. So it doesn't matter what your business intelligence application is, whether it's DataSelf, Power BI, Tableau, Sage Data and Analytics, they all have some aspect where you massage the data in the model. So that's just typical terminology. So get used to that if you start to play with your Power BI. We're going to do some common data tweaks now. Okay, so we're going to come over here to the Transform Data button. Now this opens something called the Power Query Editor. There's that word query again. So that's SQL language. That means we're talking to SQL. So the Power Query Editor, whereas you can write your queries directly in SQL, you saw me do one where I had it inquire and show me the top 1,000 rows that didn't happen to be there. So really when we're doing things in this interface, it's like we're using the power of SQL to write queries that are much more difficult to write by hand than it is to use this kind of technology in this tool. So what we're going to do is just talk about some common data tweaks, and we're going to do a few common data tweaks. Okay, so common data tweaks might be things like changing the data type, maybe a string to a numeric field. You may need to alter column names. You may want to filter out data that you don't want to be available in your reporting. You may want to add new columns of data that aren't in your data to give information that isn't really there in the raw data. So there's lots and lots and lots of other things you can do. You could probably spend 5 webinars just on the Power Query Editor. We're going to do a few simple things just to give you the flavor of what we're doing here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to highlight the AR invoice history header table, and we're going to just do a few quick things here. We're going to try updating the data type. So as we come across our columns, we can see all of the fields in this table. You know, lots of data there. One of them we're going to look at here is this invoice date. Now notice that this invoice date has a date and a timestamp, and a lot of times you'll see things like that when you're tied into a Sql Server more often than you would than say standard or advanced. But either way, I don't want to see this timestamp. When I'm doing reporting with these tables, I really just want to work with the actual raw date. I don't really need this timestamp kind of getting in my way and messing up my view. So one of the things that I could do is I could highlight this column, and I can come over here to my data type and see it says date time. We're just going to make it date. And that updates my date. Now notice that the Power Query Editor over here is keeping track of everything I'm doing. So it's recording all of this essentially. So I've now got my invoice date the way I want it. We'll do a quick rename of a field here. Let's say that this customer number, let's say we wanted to change the name of that for whatever reason. Very simple, type into it, change the name, done. So you can change the name of your fields. All right, now let's try adding a custom column here. So over here, we'll do the add column. We'll do a custom column, and we'll do a couple of these. Okay. Now this is one of the things that can be very frustrating. At least for me, it's been a little frustrating in Power BI. You may have to learn a little Dax syntax, which is what Power BI uses in places. So watch out for that. If that's the case, you know, either learn Dax or figure out, you know, what are the other applications like Tableau or DataSelf that you'd like to use. But we're going to go ahead and create a formula here. What we want to do in this one is we want to have the total sale amount. So for you Sage 100 users out there, you know that Sage doesn't really provide that field. So we're going to come down here and we're going to try to calculate that. Okay, so Sage tracks it by the taxable amount and the non-taxable amount. So the combination of those two is the total sales amount. So we'll put our formula in there, very simple one in this particular case, and we'll just hit OK. And it's added that custom column right to the end of our data here, and we can see the numbers are actually there. Now we have to do something else here. We have to be careful. The data type here can be problematic. So what we're going to want to do is change that. If I can find the column here, here we go. We're going to want to change that to a whole number or a decimal number. So we're going to do decimal number in this case, and that's going to let us do math with it if we need to, and we can change the decimals and so on. So we'll add one more here. And this one, we're going to use this to be our gross profit. Oh, hang on a second. Oh, that's the problem. Here, hold on, I see what I did. I forgot to give it a name. No wonder I couldn't find it. Okay, there we go. All right, this one will be our gross profit. And that's what I was looking for that I couldn't find because I didn't name it. So we'll say the total sale amount minus the cost of sales will give us our gross profit. There it is. All right, and Power BI is checking, this is really basic. It's not finding any problems here with our formula so far, so we should be good to go. And there's our gross profit. And similarly, we're going to want to change that data type . We'll make it a decimal number. Okay, so that's a few things running through that. Now, there's all kinds of other things in here. There's grouping and various other things you can play with. Again, you could spend a lot of time just talking about this feature. We're going to go ahead and hit close and apply. So what it's going to do now, it's going to apply all those things, and it's going to bring show the data in that way in our reporting that we're going to bring in. So it's not caching the data, it's just doing a query to make available to us in our reporting what we're going to be able to do with it. Okay, now this might be a good point to save it now that we've got our model, our tables, and we've gone through and done what we wanted to do that. Let's build some visuals. So over here on this little tab here on the left where it shows a little kind of a chart icon, this is the place where you can actually start to build some visuals. So there's a lot of different ways that people like to do this. Some people like to start with a text box and actually give the visual a name. So this is basically kind of what's considered a report that we're building. So let's see here, we'll try a 16, and we won't do too much manipulation of the actual looks and feel inside of Power BI today, but you'll see that there's a lot you can do. You can change the visuals to look just about any way you want in terms of colors and formats. So we give this thing a name, whatever makes sense for us, and then we can move things around as needed. So if you want to center this or something in the middle of your report, you can do that. You get the idea, close enough. So there we go, I've got a report title, wahoo. Next thing we're gonna do, and this is where you see a lot of individual differences with how people like to do things, but we're gonna get going here. Let's try to do a slicer. I like to do the slicer first. So the idea here is we've got these panes, we've got our fields, we've got visualizations, and we've got filters. So what we're going to be doing is picking visuals, picking fields, and working with all this material here. So I like to start with a slicer. So here's the slicer icon. So if I click that, it throws the visual onto the graphic here, onto the canvas, and it's empty. And then what we've got to do is add some things to it. So we're going to use the AR invoice history header on this one. We're going to come down here to the invoice date. This is a common thing used with slicers. So different ways of doing the slicers or adding data to graphics. One way is to just drag something into the visual itself. And here it is, it gave me the invoice date. I'm going to shrink that up. Now we are dealing with demonstration data in Sage, which is dated 2025, which is why it gave us this date range. I think there's one transaction in 2026. So I'm just going to move that slicer up here to the upper left for no particular reason other than that's where I think I want it. You can certainly change the size of these things. Here's a drop down button. You can do different options for different types of slicer looks and feels. We're just going to leave it as a slider for now, but showing you there's that option. And then what we're going to do is, as we build more graphics here and more visuals, and we save it, we're going to be able to actually refresh all of the graphics in this report using that slicer. So it's going to update all the data for us. So let's build some more. Let's build some more visuals. Another really common one that you'll see is cards. And these are fairly simple. These are actually showing up in a lot of the new ERP packages that look very similar to this, if not identical. So we've got our visual out there. Now we've got to find some fields for it. So let's come over here and find our total sales. So there's our total sale amount. So another way of adding a field to a visual is to move it into the actual elements over here in the visualizations for it. So then instead of dragging it right into the graphic, I dragged it into here. You know, what you have available for fields over here depends on the nature of the graphic that you picked. So for slicer, all we get is a fields. So for this, I can then change this, you know, moving around, make it bigger, smaller, whatever I want to do. I can change the cosmetics. I'm just going to leave these kind of a stock size and look in the interest of time today. I'm going to move that one over there. I'm going to do one more card just so you get the feel of it. I'll hit the card again, and this time we'll just do the gross profit. And I'll just drag that one onto it directly this time, just to change it up. And we'll shrink that down, bring that up. So a lot of people like to build some cards down the side or down the side and across the top and have more graphics in the middle. So we'll do some more interesting graphics now. Next one we'll throw a pie chart on here, okay? So you gotta be careful. If you're on one of these graphics and you change the graphic over here, it's highlighted, it'll change that to a pie chart. So I wanna make sure I click off of it and that I'm not selected. Common gotcha. So there it is, it threw it out there. Now what we're gonna do, we're gonna just play with some of the same data elements over and over so we can see how in a very basic fashion we get different visuals depending on what we're doing here. So let's throw the total sales amount in here. So we're going to put that in our values. We'll do our gross profit. And we might as well throw the cost of sales in there for good measure. Okay, so you can see it's updating our visual here. And again, we can just resize this around. We can mess around with the look and the feel, the size, the colors, the fonts, all that good stuff. This is the defaults. We're gonna kind of go with that. So that's a real simple pie chart. Let's throw a clustered column chart in here next. Okay, there's our clustered column chart. Let's stretch it out, get it a little bigger. And for this one, we'll put our customer in here. Now here's our customer ID. We'll put that as our access. And then we'll put some values in here. So let's just do the couple of these again, gross profit and total sales. Okay, and we'll make that a little bigger. You get the idea. We're seeing some graphics in here. Can hover over things and get data. We'll work on getting to some drill downs here shortly. So I'm just going to make that down there, get that out of the way a little bit. And we're going to do, I think we're going to do the map next. Let's try the map next. We got a pretty good amount of real estate here. The map is actually my favorite. I love the map. So if you click on the map, we'll drag this thing out. And then with the map, the first thing we have to know is, map, location, geography. So we need to have, here, we need to have a location element that we want to actually see in a map. So let's come up here and let's try, it's demo data. Let's try the build to zip code. So if we drag the build to zip code over to this location field, it'll create a map, and I'll try to make this bigger. And immediately it's already got some dots on the map, which represent places where there's something in the data where there's a build to zip code. But what we need to know now is we can also map, we want to see the size of what it is and what are we tracking. So in this case, let's say we want the total sales amount. We'll drag that over to the size here. And now when we zoom in, we can see that based on the amount of the sales, the button here on the map is bigger or smaller depending on the amount of the sale in that zip code. So I love the maps. You can actually drill all the way down in these maps, and there's different types of maps. You can get a satellite type view map or different things here, but you know, we're zooming really close in here, what looks like even somebody's house potentially. So demo data probably a little sketchy there, but you get the idea with the map. You can zoom in and zoom out. Now what we're going to do here is we're just going to make a quick page 2. So down here, we'll click page 2, and you can name these if you want. If I want, I could give it a name like credit, whatever makes sense for that tab. And then we'll make another graphic over here. Okay, let's see here. This will be a fun one. Let's do a table, a little table here. So here's the table icon. If we click the table here, I'll stretch this out a little bit. I might add a slicer, who knows? And then let's do something fun. This will be very simple. Here's our customer table. So we're going to need a few fields here to get started. So for those of you who don't know, Sage keeps track of the customers by a customer ID, and if you have divisions, the division number is part of the customer ID. So that's why we're adding the division. And there's our customer number, and then we'll just do this credit limit. And here we have a small, simple table showing Sage customer IDs and their current credit limits. Now, just to highlight the power of direct query, what we're going to do is, and I'm going to add a slicer here real quick too. This works better with a slicer. I like my slicers up near the top. So let's move things around here a little bit. There we are. And let's get our invoice date slicer here just for fun. And then we're going to actually change the data in Sage and see this data change right here in our Power BI. So observation, ad comp has a $9,000 credit limit. If I go into Sage, pull up that customer, and there they are, they're at $9,000. Let's give them a bump. Let's put them at $12,000. So we'll hit accept. We'll just double check that to make sure it's stuck. The customer now has a $12,000 credit limit. So let's go see what the power of direct query is. So with direct query, any data that I have in my report here on either page, you know, it's going to, as soon as I make a request that triggers a query in the database, like using my slicer to update the data, it immediately performs that direct query, and it should immediately update the values in this table here. So what we'll do is we'll see if I can move this out of my way a little bit. And here, so as soon as I did that, you see it updated to $12,000 just there, just by clicking it. So very fast, there's no cached data. That's part of the power of this direct query. It just changed the data that quick. All right, let's do a different one here. Let's do something with try to do something with a drill down. Really popular thing in BI applications are all kinds of different types of drill downs that you can do. All right, so let's see here. All right, so what we'll do is we're going to do a clustered column chart for this example. Okay. All right, so we're going to do invoice date, bill to state, bill to city, and bill to zip code. Now to do drill downs, you have to have a hierarchy, and there may be existing hierarchies in your data natively, or you might have to create them. So that's another topic that you can kind of study up on. But in this case, we have the city, state, and zip code or some type of a hierarchy that we're going to be able to work with here. And then what we're going to want in here is our total sales. And we'll put that in our values. Okay, and we'll try to stretch this one out a little bit. Sorry about those bars being really small and thin. By default, we don't have time to pretty it up for today, but we do have time to talk about drill downs. So here we have our chart. This is these icons up here with the little arrows, they have to do with drill downs. So here, if we hover over this one, this is where we have a couple different types of drill downs. If we click that, it puts a black circle around it, and that turns on a drill down feature. So this is a drill down on a particular chart graphic as one of the features. So if I come over here to this tall bar here, just because it happens to be the biggest one, it's telling us that on January 20th, 2025, we had a 228,000 in sales. Let's click on that. And we've now drilled down, and everything's apparently in California. And now we're drilling down to the city. There's the breakdown by city. And again, we can hover over these to get values. And if I want to drill down again, I'll pick on one of these. Then there's the zip code, obviously demo data. But so we'll come back up and we'll do another drill down. But that's all possible because of what's called a hierarchy. So in this case, the hierarchy, state, city, and zip code. All right, so that is one type of a drill down on a particular bar on a graphic. And then you can also do a drill down on the whole chart. So without picking on a particular bar, with this turned on, I can just start drilling down. So go to the next level in the hierarchy. We'll see what that does. There's the states. There is some demo data here that's a little out of line. We saw that on the map as well. And we go again. There's our cities, and there's our zip codes. So I'll go all the way back up. So that's kind of a little bit on the drill downs, a couple different drill down features there that people like to use. Okay, now we've been building a few things here, so let's go ahead and save this. And we'll come back here to page 1. Now here, I haven't actually showed you the slicer. We saw it a little bit on that credit limit example, but if I change this, for example, down to the dates, we can immediately see all the figures change and all the graphics that we have. Now, some of them change more than others depending on you know, what we're seeing here, but just shows you that that direct query, it's going right out to that SQL Server. It's looking at that data, and every time I make a request, direct query gives me the direct answer pretty quick. Now, if you're using cache data, you may have to actually refresh that cache data if you're Sage 100 Advanced before you can actually get the true answer. We're tapping in really right to the raw database with a direct query, so that is right up to date right now. Okay, so we saved our stuff here, and now we're ready to actually bring this up to the next step. We're going to publish this data to the Power BI service. Okay, so different ways of doing this. The easiest way is just to click this publish button right here, a nice big button. We click publish. We'll talk about what we're seeing here now, and we'll see this in a little more detail in a moment when we get into the Power BI service. Like several Microsoft applications, they like to carve up the workspace in the Power BI service by what's called a workspace. A workspace is nothing other than an area where you collect particular content. So everybody has a My Workspace. That's like your personal scratch pad working area. You can see there's some other workspaces that we've got out here. These were created, so you can also create a workspace. Typically, you would have a workspace where you would publish your data for end users. It wouldn't be in your workspace. For today, we're just going to use My Workspace. So I have to pick a workspace that exists, and here is Microsoft telling us about their mobile layouts that they're very proud of, but it's actually uploading that right now. It's publishing it. Publishing really just means uploading this PBIX file to the Power BI service in the internet. And as you can see, it was successful. Okay, now that that was successful, we really don't need this desktop open anymore. So what we'll do is we'll just close this. And we definitely want to save whatever was there. And we'll talk more about this guy in a minute. So now we're going to actually log into the Power BI service. So I'm launching my web browser, and I'm going to log into my Microsoft Office 365. Yep, there's our Duo security. Okay, now we're in my Office 365 online in the internet. Now you can see all the regular Microsoft icons here that you know and love. This yellow one here, of course, is our Power BI icon. So we'll launch that. So now I'm in the internet. We'll talk a little bit about the Power BI service here. We'll just kind of give you a quick and dirty orientation. So this is the landing page. You know, you can kind of see different content that you've got here created recently. So that's your home tab, kind of the landing page. You can make favorites out of things. If you want to make favorites, go ahead and do that. Recents, if you want to see recent activity, recent files, recent reports, other things, go there. Data sets, we'll talk about data sets. Data sets are the things that we've uploaded or published to the Power BI service. Here is this 1/03/10/22 demo. That's the one I just published at 10:51 local time. Here's some different ones that I have. So data sets are identified by these red icons with the cylinder, kind of like a SQL icon in some places. Goals, I haven't messed around with goals too much. You can have apps. You may have things that are shared with you. This might be a place where you can go to that. Learn, access to online learning. And then here's those workspaces that we saw. Those are the ones that we didn't publish to that exist. So those are the custom workspaces that have been created. And then here's my workspace where we actually published it to. So if I click on my workspace, we see just the data sets under my workspace. So there they are. There's the one for today. If we go over here to the content tab, these are the visuals that have been created. So there's the one that we just made just now. These are some other ones that I already have. So this icon here, the blue chart, means it's a report, the thing that we just created on the desktop. This icon here, it's a speedometer that represents the dashboard. So we're going to take a look at that a bit. And so those are the different icons that you have there. Now, if I wanted to share this, for example, you can see there's an icon here to share this. I can click that button, and as you can see, there's a place for me to start adding different people or groups in my organization. You can choose to, these options down here. I'm not actually going to share it with anyone today because I'm the only one doing the demo, but you can send that out. I've tested it. It works fine. Somebody will get a link, and then they'll be able to access the content that you've shared with them. That's the concept there. So that's definitely something you'll need to do in a real life scenario. Okay, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the gateway function. So if we pop into this thing, this is our report that we just built on the desktop. It's not going to load very much other than what we brought up here because we don't have any way of really connecting it. So it's not going to do a whole lot. So what do we need to do? So here's what we need to do. Over here on my desktop, I've downloaded a gateway through the Power BI application. Now the purpose of the gateway is just to create a connection between your Power BI service and the place where your data resides. So this is going to allow us to do some refreshes of the data all the way from our SQL Server all the way to the content in the internet in the Power BI service. There are two types of gateways. There is a personal gateway and a on-premises non-personal one. The only difference I can really see is that the personal one does not support a direct query. So we are using the regular gateway. I don't know why you would ever go with anything else. The gateway wasn't very difficult for me to install. I don't have to be signed into this, but I just want to show it to you. Whoops, got to put the .com there. Okay, so gateways here, and really all we're pointing out is that there is something you have to download for this gateway. You do need to set it up. You don't have to stay logged into it all the time. I like to log into it because I just like to see these little things that tells me it's ready. So it doesn't have to be logged in. We're just going to go ahead and close it, but that's just the little gateway right here on my PC. Now, let's see here. Now what we're going to do is go back to the Power BI service, and we're going to attempt to schedule a refresh of this data using that gateway and actually see if we can change some data in Sage and see how quick it updates the data all the way in the internet. So to do that, we will need to be on our data sets and data flows. Here is our data set for today. And what we're going to do is get in here and configure this. So we hover over this icon here. It says schedule a refresh. So we'll go into there. And we're going to open up this gateway connection. You can see it's already picking it up. And I'm going to tell it that you're for the SQL Server VDI 14. That's the name of my virtual machine. And then I'm going to click apply to that. And let's see, is there anything else we would want to do here? Main thing we want to see here is that this is running and it's showing in green. So we're happy. Then we're going to come down here to the scheduled refresh. Here's the place where we can tell it how often do we want this to refresh. The default is an hour. We'll change it to 15 minutes. I don't know that we'll have 15 minutes left of the webinar today, but we'll see what happens. So we've applied that for 15 minutes. And then what we'll do is we'll go back And let's see here. We'll take a look at this. Now we can see when it was refreshed, that's the time we uploaded it. And we can see now that the next scheduled refresh is in about 15 minutes. So this does work. I don't know that we'll have the 15 minutes, but we'll wait and see. What we're going to do now is we're going to go back into Sage real quick. We're going to pull up that customer, and we're going to change that credit limit again, and we're going to do that same test and see how fast we can refresh the data all the way in the internet. So we'll make them $15,000 now. Always good to double check that you got your data correct. So 15,000 is the answer. Now when I come over here to my content, pop this guy open. Okay, there's page 1 that I didn't rename. There's my credit tab. So it actually already updated it to 15,000. Just literally when I went into it. So it's already refreshed. Now, typically I might have to actually perform this query because it would actually do the query and then it would update it again. So let's just see that just for fun. All right, let's make it a different value. $10,000, nice round number. So here I am, the minute I touch this button, it tries to go query the data, boom, there's my $10,000. Pretty fast all the way to the internet from there. Okay, let's see here. I think we have really just one more kind of thing that we want to touch on for the kind of this mile wide, inch deep overview on all the moving parts, the connections and all that. So the next thing is maybe just to talk about dashboards. Okay, so these are, this is an existing dashboard for that MO1 company that we're pulling data out of today. So if I go into the MO1 dashboard, there isn't really anything in it. You can see there's just one little tile there. So how do we actually create a dashboard? How do we add things to a dashboard? And what is a dashboard? How is it different than the reports? So we'll come back here to my workspace. We'll come in here, and the concept with the dashboard is that this content here that we created, in theory, the concept that this is related data. In this case, where we're using some sales data, gross profit, total sales, that type of thing. So in theory, all of the graphics on this particular report are related to that somehow, which is why we use that over and over. So what can happen is if we want to build a dashboard, we can add one of the elements on this report to our dashboard. And then once we're in that dashboard, we can see these elements and we can actually click on them and take us back to all this other detail that we've created. So it's very simple. Let's say that, you know, you like this map and you want that on your dashboard. All you really have to do is come over, hover over it, and there's this little pin visual. It's that easy. If I click the pin visual, it's going to say pin to dashboard. Do I want to do an existing dashboard or do I want to do a new dashboard? If I want to do a new dashboard, I click new and I give it a name and it creates it. It's that easy. Here I'm just going to pick this particular dashboard, and then it's done it already. And if I tell it I want to go to that dashboard, or I could browse to it through the other method, there is my, in this case, map that's been added to it. Now the idea is you would build out a dashboard that might have different elements. And let's say that I was looking at this chart and I thought, oh, that's really great. I wonder what else is related to that. I can click on that map and it takes me back to the underlying report with all of its other visuals and data that supports that particular chart where it came from. So right there, it took me back to its source where I can see all of the other data that's in here. So a dashboard is nothing more than a conglomeration of visuals that have been pinned from one or more other reports. They do not have to come from the same data source or the same report. So that's drill down functionality back into the source depending on the graphic that you're clicking on. And that was kind of what I wanted to show you guys today. I'm going to pop up our slide here, and I think we've got another poll question. I'll turn it over to Courtney here.
Yes, thank you, Bruce. That was great to see in action and a lot of detail and ability to create different dashboards, reports, and drill down in there. So now that everyone has seen Power BI in action, we just have one more question, just asking sort of get your feedback on what you think if you haven't seen the Power BI capabilities before. Are you interested in learning more about it? Do you think there's potential in it, or do you not see how Power BI will really work for you and your business? So I appreciate everyone. I know we've gone a bit over time here. And so I appreciate you guys sticking with us and everyone for responding to the poll. And we will give that a couple more seconds as I see some answers still coming in. And we're going to go ahead and close the poll out in 5, 4, 3, 2. Oh, saw those last minute answers. So thank you everyone for answering the poll. And we can see those results. So there's a good portion of you, about 30%, that are interested in learning even more about Power BI. And about over half of you think there's some potential in it, and about 10% are not so sure that they're seeing the benefit in Power BI. So that's interesting across the board. And those of you that aren't sure still, maybe there's another version, maybe you need more capabilities, or it just can really benefit you in multiple ways. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that and let you go on, Bruce.
Okay, that is it. Thank you. We can open up to a few questions if anybody has them.
Yes, so if you have any questions, remember you can look for the question section in your GoToWebinar box and enter those in. And we got one comment. Thank you for a great high-level overview. So thank you for that, and being pleased with that. It was great for me to see as well. Bruce is kind of showing me a bit of Power BI for the first time as well. We'll give it a couple more seconds if you have a question, but I think we might be good on the questions, Bruce. That was very well done, high-level overview, and got to see a lot there. So if you are interested in learning more, there will be a short survey after you close out of the webinar. And if you want to learn more, just click on that button and SWK will reach out to you, and we're happy to show you a bit more of Power BI in action and how you can make it work for you. And so thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bruce. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.